October 25th, about 10 years ago, I made the decision that I wanted to die. I went so far as to plan out all the materials that I needed in front of me. I pinned a suicide note to the lapel of my blue cardigan sweater. I didn't do it. And the question you might ask is, why? What could have brought somebody who's a college professor, who's a father, who seems to have so much going on in his life, what could have brought me to this place? And what I want to talk to you about is mental illness, clinical depression, and a syndrome called Imposter Syndrome. Let me just state right up front, I have a thinking problem. Some of you can go out and think about yourselves once or twice a day and you're absolutely fine. But when I start thinking about myself, I can't stop and nothing good ever happens. See, what happens is when I start thinking, I have these squirrels that live in my head. And they take information in and they put it through what I call the awfulizer. And what comes out is always the worst case scenario. Now, I don't know why this is the case, but I just happened to develop that way. I'm an incredibly average guy. I had a pretty normal average childhood with a couple of things that didn't quite go my way. But as a result of my thinking, I developed this toolkit as a young man to deal with the way that I felt. And it wasn't a particularly healthy toolkit. If you look at it, it says things like anger and resentment and dishonesty and running from people and trying to hide and protect myself. I always wanted to hide my true self from others, but I always wanted to fit in. So I was this master of facades. I could always tell you what you wanted to hear or manipulate you in some way, shape, or form so that you would like me or invite me into your group. This led to some serious behavioral issues and some other destructive behaviors that I'll talk about in a little bit. One of my problems is feeling less than. That's the imposter in me. Feeling less than the college years. So with that tool set that I had, I went off to college, and within 5 seconds of being on a college campus, I knew that I was in deep trouble. Everybody I looked around at, they looked better than me, they looked smarter than me, they all knew what was going on, and I said, oh my God, I lost the manual, or I missed a memo, or an orientation, or something like that. These people are gonna find out that I'm a fraud, an absolute fraud. So I lived in this internal terror that I was gonna be found out for being a fraud. And as it turns out, I was actually quite a good college student, and this is where the imposter syndrome thing comes in. But despite the empirical evidence that I was a good college student, I had all this anxiety and all this stress. And I didn't understand why it felt like every day I was having 13 simultaneous heart attacks, or I couldn't get out of bed. I just didn't know what was going on. This was the mid-90s. Mental health was not really talked about. As I started to go through college, things started to get worse, and the tool set that I had so far began to fail me. Not that it was a very good one, but I needed to add, a couple more arrows to my quiver, so I came up with this one. That's coming shortly. Anger, alcohol, and cigarettes should fuel you through your 20s. That's what 21-year-old Brian said out loud one time. Whenever I would have these feelings that things were getting out of control, this is what I would turn to. This was my go-to move. I'd smoke a million cigarettes, probably party too much, and just hope that everything would work out. But it didn't really work out all that well. So I decided that, listen, what I'm going to do is two things. First, I'm going to run from my problems, right? I've got a thinking problem, so let me just run away from everything that's potentially going to go wrong. The problem with that is, when you got a thinking problem like me, wherever you go, your brain goes. The problem's between your own two ears. And then I started letting these squirrels in my head, who had put life through the awfulizer, making a lot of my life decisions with me, and I had to live with the consequences. So after I got out of college, something really amazing happens after you leave college and you move through your 20s. You get to be almost 30. And I started to not know what to do again. I missed the manual on how to be a 20-something-year-old. And I dropped out of graduate school, and then I worked, and then life starts getting exponentially more complicated. I went back to graduate school, this time to a top program in the hopes that I would fail out again. And I got married, and I got a mortgage, and I got these small mammals in my life, and my children. And I, again, was just panicked. And now the stakes are much higher at this point. And I just didn't know how to deal with it. If you don't have depression, understanding depression is really hard. One time my wife said, "Brian, why can't you just be happy?" And I said, "I don't know, because it feels like I'm swimming through a sea of melancholy." There was this oppressive weight that kept me from being part of my life. I looked out there, and I could see my life passing in front of me and all the wonderful things that should be going on in my life, but no matter how hard I tried to move through this, I could never catch up. And I couldn't feel hope or joy, or I couldn't feel free. I was trapped in this prison of my mind. There was no hope. The only hope that I had was the hope that I wouldn't wake up the next morning. And I used to whisper to my wife, I'd say, right before as she was falling asleep, I'd wake her up and say, "I love you." And she said, "Why do you do that?" And I said, "In case I die in my sleep, I want you to know that." I couldn't feel joy for other people because I was too angry, being pissed off that it wasn't happening to me. And if something good happened to me, I was convinced that I didn't deserve it. I honestly believed that I didn't deserve to be happy in life. What are some of the consequences of this? Act 1, A Christmas Story. I'm in bad shape. I have a toddler. We go to Christmas. He's playing with some toy that's making a whole bunch of noise, and I don't know, I took it and I must have smashed it or something. I don't remember exactly what happened. And my toddler child says, "I don't think I like Christmas very much." And I said, "Good. You know why? Because I hate Christmas too." And I meant it. And the next year, I was uninvited to Christmas. Act 2, How to Incorrectly Utilize a Therapist. Something was terribly wrong, so my wife said, "You should probably go talk to somebody and get some professional help." And so I did. And I wasn't really ready to be helped, so I started telling this individual what was going on, and she said, "Oh, you're not a half-bad guy." And I said, "Really? Maybe I can manipulate her to tell me all kinds of good things." And so I just started making things up. I lied to my therapist. I didn't really I didn't really do this thing, but if she tells me that I'm a good guy, then I'll just keep feeding her that info. And that really wasn't all that helpful. And this begins the downward spiral. Well, the downward spiral. Can we get the downward spiral, please? The downward spiral. At this point, the wheels have come completely off the cart. I have no hope, I have no joy, and I'm not sure I want to be on this planet anymore. I'm looking for an exit strategy. I have manipulated everybody around me to the point where the only way that I can find some sort of joy is to have them validate my existence. And so what I did was I made up a lot of different stories as a father and as a professional and as a husband, and I would do all these different things to get people to like me and to help me feel better about myself. And after a while, it just didn't work anymore. Like the pressure of all of that lying became exhaustive, and there was nothing that I could do about it. And I had no more tools. I didn't know what to do. And so I decided the only way for me to get out of this is to erase myself from this earth. Because I knew if I just left, I would do damage from afar. I honestly believed that if I died by suicide, my family would be better off. I woke up one morning. I had been outside. I'd been out. I didn't tell anyone where I'd been. I just disappeared from the planet for a night. And I woke up, and everyone was mad at me, rightly so. And I don't know why, but I had hit the absolute bottom, and I just said to my wife the first honest thing I think I've said in my entire life, which is, I tried to kill myself. And in that terrible phrase, there was a little bit of hope. And in that hope was that I might actually get better. And she said, we need to get you to a professional. And so that we got this gang of professionals. I don't know how many. It's like they came down in a helicopter and shot me with a tranquilizer dart full of antidepressants. And I went to everybody who wanted to hear me, and I went a lot. And I told them everything. And for the first time in probably 20 years, I told the truth. And I felt good about it. But it was baby steps, baby. All right? It wasn't easy. I couldn't work. I was basically a non-functional adult. My wife came home one day. I had been home by myself, and I don't know how I did it, but I made the bed. And she said, you made the bed. I'm so proud of you. And I was like, I did. I made the bed. And it wasn't because she was heaping praise on me that I felt good. I felt good because I did something that normal people normally do. And so I went around the house trying to find other things that normal people do, like empty the dishwasher. And life started to get a little bit easier and a little bit easier. And I realized that one of the biggest things that I had to change was I had to learn how to forgive myself and be a heck of a lot easier on myself. And I had to control my thinking, because my thinking was pretty dangerous. I have to go outside every single day and deal with the world. And the adult world absolutely baffles me at every turn. So I need to remember to think in certain ways every day of my life. So as I go out and on my way to work, I remember that there's a beautiful mountain there. The first instruction that I have is I make sure that I don't compare my insides to other people's outsides, right? That's an absolute poison pill for me. If I compare my insides to other people's outsides, that to me is going to lead me down a path to discontentment and into a very dangerous place. What I need to do is to interface with humanity and treat others the way that I want to be treated, but what goes along with that is I need to remember that people aren't always going to treat me the way that I want to be treated. And so I have to be okay with that. And there's two sides to every street. There's my side of the street, and then there's your side of the street. If you weren't nice to me back then, I would hold that resentment against you forever and always. You are on my poo list, people. But now I'm just like, I got to let that one slide because it's not good for me. And for a long time, I didn't really act with honesty and integrity and humanity. And interfacing with humanity, I find on a daily basis, is really important. And so whenever I go to the grocery store or I run into some low-wage clerk, I always make sure that I tell them thank you, or I ask them how their day is. And if they don't really want to engage with me, well, then I dig in until they talk to me. I mean, I deal with it like an Olympic sport, okay? And I gave up a long time ago on having a better past. Whatever happened in the past, that's water under the bridge. There's nothing I can do about it. The shoulda, coulda, wouldas, they're gone. and being humble. One definition of being humble that I really like is being humble doesn't mean thinking less about myself. It just means thinking about myself less often. And if I can think about other people, then I'm not thinking about me. And as a teacher, as a professor, as a mentor, as a father and a husband, I'm in a great position to do that on a daily basis. And the more that I can help other people and the more that I can be of service to others, the better off my thinking is and the better off my life is. And here's one that's a family favorite. I always thought the grass was greener, wherever it was, but it turns out that it's not. So here's my family famous quote. If you spend 1 foot into yesterday and 1 foot in tomorrow, all you do is poop on today. And trust me, people, I spent a whole lot of my life pooping on today. And I honestly think now that I was not put on this earth to be miserable. I spent too much of my life being miserable. And what I want to be and what I am today is happy, joyous, and free to live the kind of life that I want to live. Thank you.